I know. I think we're going to switch over. Okay, here we go. So our agenda for today. So lunch is, for those of you here, I apologize, but I ordered it. I confirmed that I ordered it. I called the store. They still haven't brought the pizza yet. So hopefully it'll show up mid-presentation. But if it does, feel free to go back there and get some lunch. We're going to go through a few announcements, talk about what's new, and then we're going to turn it over to Chris to show us what is new in modern Excel. So our announcements. So one announcement is that I heard from Darlene that they're going to relax the COVID health check, so we won't have to do that in the future. So I think that'll help get some more people here in person. We also have a YouTube channel that's got several of our past meetings, so you can check that out. We have some really good international speakers and local speakers up there, so do check that out. And then our upcoming meetings, we've got a dashboard contest in January. So this is a chance for you people in the user group to share either something you've created at work or for fun. If it's for work, if you could de-identify anything sensitive so you can share it with the group. And we let people have 5 or 10 minutes to tell the story of their dashboard. And then we're going to have the actual people attending online or in person vote, and we'll declare a winner. And you get bragging rights. We don't have any financial prize, but it's usually a lot of fun. So the twist with this one is that we've usually let you use Excel or Power BI. This time we're going to allow people to use Tableau. And one of our organizers is proficient at both, and he's actually an organizer of the Tableau user group. So he's going to invite them if they want to have a dashboard as well. So just, you're welcome to use any tool, and we'll see what people like. So, and then in February, we have a Power BI what if scenario case study. So it's a actual project that the person who is knowledgeable about the business is going to present how Power BI was used in that scenario. So look out for that being posted. The dashboard contest is posted on our meetup right now, so you could sign up today if you wanted to. And then we have a slide in here we usually have people that are looking for job opportunities. So we want to give them a chance to share. So if that's you and you want to share, please do. And then also if anybody has any openings, we want to give you a chance to share that as well. So anybody in person, or if you are online, if you just want to put it into the chat, please do. And then what's new? So this is, I think, a little bit of a slower month since it's the holidays. So the Microsoft team is slowing down. There was a cool Excel update. Let's see here. So this is a minor one, but we like to cover Excel and Power BI when we can. So there's a new function in Excel called image. And so it looks like there's several parameters you can pass in, but basically you can see that it's passing in the URL to an image. And what's different about this is it actually puts the image in the cell. So it's not just an image floating on top of your spreadsheet, but it's actually in a cell. So that's a new function in Excel that came out this month. And then Power BI, usually they have like a 30-minute video on the blog detailing the changes. This month it was 5 minutes, so less changes this month. But the one that I wanted to point out that was a good one was the slicer. So the slicer is a very key visual because you're filtering your report. And I was recently teaching a new user how to do a relative date slicer, but it wasn't really intuitive to find it because you kind of have to hover to get to a menu that says, gives you the different options of what the slicer, whether it's a list or a between or a relative. So that has moved to the filter pane this month. So it's much easier to find that setting and change it. And then another thing that I point you to the video to check out is there's some new useful DAX functions of index and window. And I'm not going to explain them, but they did look useful for different scenarios. So I'll point you to the video to check that out. And then I have November here as well, since we didn't meet in November, but some of the updates. One noticeable one is the accent color in Power BI has changed from yellow to teal. So I noticed that when I downloaded the recent one, I was like, whoa, different color here. But that changed in November. And then I'm also going to point you to the blog for the explanation on the small multiples, but there's some enhancements on unsharing certain axes between small multiples, which I think could be useful depending on what the story you're trying to tell. And then Azure Maps keeps getting updates, but it's still in preview. It's my favorite map visual. It's really, really quality. And I have a project I'm working on for the government, and they can't have Azure Maps because it's not GA. They don't get the preview stuff yet. So I'm waiting for it to go GA. But it's still, if you are not working for the government, it's a great map to use. I highly recommend it. November, we also got some new DAX, which is more about outputting data. You can output it to a log or to CSV or to JSON. And then some things in the Power BI service that are new. So one big one that I almost missed is that paginated reports is available outside of Premium. It's available in the Pro SKU. So that should open it up to a lot more smaller, or just any organization that is not Premium or has workspaces that are not Premium. So that's a big change. You can also subscribe to reports with the filters you set. So there's a checkbox when you subscribe to a report that allows you to send the email to you or others with that filter in place, which is cool. And you can read the other things there. There's some, you can right click and select share on visuals to share an image or share it to Teams. So there's some improvements there. We try to cover Power Apps as well, and Power Automate, just part of the Power Platform, although we usually don't focus on it. But again, it's slow for Power Apps. There's not a lot happening this month, but there has been this year. It's changed a lot. But the things that have changed are around learning. So they're on their page. They've updated the learning portal so you can find content to learn how to create Power Apps. And they've also come out with certifications for students. So PMI and Microsoft have certifications for being a low-code app developer. And they thought this was important because there's a skill gap in needing pro code developers. There's not enough to create the apps that the world needs. So they're trying to fill it with low-code app developers. And so this is to help students get certified and be able to be employable developing apps. And then Power Automate, also not much happening this month. Power Automate Desktop got updated. I haven't tried that yet, but that's robotic process automation. It automatically records your mouse and keyboard clicks, so you can automate manual things that can't be automated in the cloud. And so that's the tool for that, and that keeps getting updated. And then there were also 13 new connectors published. I did look through them and I saw one that was relevant, and I thought I would share that briefly. So it was the Quick Chart API service. And basically you can request a chart. So you send it your data and you get an image back of your chart. So I thought that'd be useful. So in Power Automate, you can run a DAX query to get data set from your Power BI model. And so you could use this, you could send that data to this Quick Chart and get a chart back and put it into an email to email the image So I thought that was relevant because it's a way you could visualize your Power BI data in Power Automate and then do something with it. So all that to say, they keep adding connectors so you can connect. And it's a good story for Power BI because your data doesn't just end with the report. You could connect Power Automate to your Power BI model and send your data wherever it needs to go. So that is all from me, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris. For those of you who have not heard Chris, I think he was an expert on Power BI right when it started. So when all of us were just learning about it, he was on the leading edge, and I think he's stayed on the leading edge. He has a blog where he tries to write about things that are new that people don't know about, new features or new tricks you can do with Power BI and Power Query. And he now works for Microsoft. So he's on the Power BI team. And so I'm excited to hear what he's going to say today about modern Excel. And I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Cool. Thank you. All right. You see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you. I've already been introduced, so I won't introduce myself again, but follow me on Twitter and read my blog. URL for my blog's there. And, as Will said, I work for Microsoft on the Power BI team, but today I'm not going to be talking about Power BI. There will be no Power BI content whatsoever, because I've got a long history with Microsoft BI, going well before Power BI. I was an analysis services person. I was a modern Excel, Power Pivot, Power Query person. I still love Excel. And a couple of months ago, Celia Alves, who runs the Toronto Modern Excel user group, contacted me asking if I could do a presentation. And she suggested, how about doing a presentation on what's new in modern Excel for BI? And I thought, actually, that is an absolute genius idea, because I loved Power Pivot. I loved Power Query. But nowadays, Power BI is all that anybody ever talks about. But a lot of stuff has happened recently inside Excel, really exciting new stuff, specifically BI stuff, but also just general Excel things. And it got me thinking, what's the current state of play with modern Excel? What are the things that we can do for BI in Excel now that we couldn't do 10 years ago when modern Excel was a big thing? So that's what I want to talk about today. To really kind of firm up the focus of the session, there are two questions that I want to answer. First of all, do I need to buy Power BI to do Excel? Or, sorry, do I need to buy Power BI to do BI? Or can I just use the Excel that I've already got? Because let's face it, everybody's got Excel. Do I need to buy something else? Do I need to learn a new tool? And more specifically, Excel, but what's changed recently? What's new in Excel that's exciting and interesting that might make it more suitable, more usable for kind of classic BI? Now, I like to firm up the scope of my presentation, and these are the rules that I set myself. So I'm going to be talking about today Excel purely as a BI reporting tool. I'm not, and I wouldn't ever pretend to be an Excel expert, but I know a lot about Power Pivot. I know a lot about Power Query. So we're going to be focusing on those areas. We're going to be focusing in Excel on the desktop, on Windows. I'll certainly mention Mac as well, briefly, and also in the browser with Excel Online. And like I said, there's going to be no Power BI, but I'm going to make an exception for one other part of the Power Platform, Power Automate. In fact, Will mentioned Power Automate Desktop. I will be showing a little bit of Power Automate Desktop in a moment. So these are the rules that I've set myself. Now, we want to know how much BI can we do in Excel now with the current state of Excel. And the next question is, well, define BI. What do we mean by business intelligence? Because of course, BI and reporting means a lot of different things to different people. And that's what I'm going to do in this session. I'm going to look at different possible definitions of BI. Is it just loading a table of data into the worksheet, or is it flashy interactive reports and dashboards? And we're going to see how well Excel does meeting all of these requirements. So let's start with the simplest possible form of BI. I want a table of data in Excel. Still, this is what most people want because, working in the world of Power BI, the most common request that I get is, how can I export that table? How can I get it into Excel so I can do the things that I always want to do? So how well can Excel give me a table of data? How well can I parameterize that table of data? Turns out it can do it really well. And to be honest, this is something that it's been able to do since the advent of Power Query. So let's just see what we've always been able to do in Power Query in Excel and consider how good it is from a BI and reporting point of view. So I've got an empty Excel workbook here. And what I'm going to do is go to Get Data. I've got SQL Server running on my desktop, so I'm going to connect to my local SQL Server. So connect to SQL Server database. I'm going to use the AdventureWorks, DW27 database. So connect to localhost. Connect to AdventureWorks DW, click OK. And I'm just going to connect to a table. This is the AdventureWorks database. And I'm going to connect to this Fact Internet Sales table, which just contains some sales data. I'm going to click Transform. And here's the table. It's got lots of things that I don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the columns that I do want. So let's choose order date, sales order number, and let's also get sales amount and tax amount. Remove other columns. Deal with the name of the tax amount column. And let's also apply a filter. We don't want all the data for all dates, so I'm just going to click on this date number field, filter equals, and there we are. So we've got all of the orders and their sales amount and tax amount for a particular date. I'm going to close and load this to a table on the existing worksheet. Click OK. And there's my table of data loaded from the SQL Server database. And this already accounts for a lot of BI requirements. We've got a table. It's connected live. We don't have to expect anything. We don't have to export anything. And indeed, I can just click refresh and Power Query goes away and gets the data. All right, that's great. Next thing, I want to be able to parameterize this. So let's turn it into something a little bit more like a report. I'm doing a very basic demo. You'll see the order date key is in a numeric format, 2010, 12, 29. It's the 29th of December, 2010. Let's pretend that we want to filter by the 30th of December, 2010. So I can type 2010, 12, 30 in here in a cell in Excel. Let's give this a name. This cell is called date filter. And I'm going to get data from this table or range. Load it into Power Query. So this is the date that I've entered on the worksheet. I'm going to make my query just return that number. And now I'm going to go into my previous query. I'm going to edit it here. And instead of hard coding the filter on the 29th of December 2010, I'm going to filter by whatever value I posted into that cell. And there you are. It's loaded now the data for the 30th of December 2010. I'm going to close and load. I don't actually want to load the value from this cell anywhere else because I'm just using it as a parameter. I'm just going to only create the connection. And there we go. And in a moment, this will come back with the data for the 30th of December 2010. Of course, these things always take a little bit longer when you're watching them. And if I was to go in here and now edit the contents of this cell to be the 31st of December and refresh this query, remember what Power Query is doing is that it's loading the data from that cell where I type the date, passing it into the query against the SQL Server database, and I've got my dynamic Power Query report, just returning a table of data in Excel. And like I said, this is what a lot of people want to do. They just want a table of data in Excel, change some parameters, click a button, and then make it a lot slicker. Now, this is a very, very basic demo. We can do all kinds of other cool things here. If I flick over to something that I've prepared earlier, this is basically the same demo with a little bit of extra code. Instead of having to type that number in a numeric format, I've got the same thing here, but where I can just type in the number as a date. And we can go into here and query and click refresh. So in a minute, when Power Query wakes up, there we are. There's the data filtered for the 30th of December. We can do even better than this. If I go over to here, this is my advanced demo. I haven't made it look particularly nice because I am not the best person making reports in Excel or Power BI look particularly nice. But if you want to get things looking really, really cool, let's filter not only by date, but by product. And look, I've got a drop-down list here. If I want to filter by date, but I want to find a date using slices, let's say we only want to get the data for January 2011, click run the report, and there we are. That's the data for January 2011. Maybe we only want the 1st to the 3rd of January, click run report, and there we are. This, I think, is looking more and more like a slick reporting tool, but again, it's all done in Excel. How did I do this? Well, this drop down is good old Excel data validation. I've used Power Query to dump a list of all of the product names onto a sheet here, and I'm just using data validation here. Something that is new with data validation in Excel is we've now got autocomplete. So if I start typing, you can see that the list filters down as I type, which I think is pretty cool. How did I get the slices working? Well, again, what I did was created another sheet with a Power Query with a date table on it. And then I filtered this date table using slices, the slices that I've copied and pasted over to here. So if I change this to February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, you can see this table is filtered here. I've then got an Excel formula here. I stole this from an Excel MVP called Charlie Kidd. And this formula has an interesting behavior. it will return 1 for the rows in an Excel table that are actually visible from a filter. But if you apply filters using a slicer, it will return 0 for the rows that are hidden. Now, with this, I've got a formula that allows me to read all the data from this table and see which rows are hidden or visible. I load this back into Power Query, and then I take those selected dates and pass them into my main Power Query query as a parameter, more or less in the same way that I did before. And then the last thing I've done here is, well, I don't want to be opening a Power Query window to try and refresh queries. I just want a big dumb button my users can hit. Well, that's what I've got here. I'm using VBA, and I'm just binding that to a button. And again, something interesting that's new is that in Excel, I think it happened just about a year ago, Power Query, we've now got full support in VBA for executing and executing Power Query queries in Excel. So now I've actually got a properly fully supported way of running Power Query queries like this. So with a bit of VBA and a bit of Power Query, I think this is what you would call a pretty good traditional BI solution. So this is pretty good. It works in Windows desktop Excel. Does it work in Excel on the Mac? Almost. Power Query is primarily a Windows desktop Excel thing, but the Power Query team are actually working on improving Power Query for the Mac. It does exist. It is now available, but there are only limited data sources available. But those data sources do include the current Excel workbook and SQL Server. So as far as I know, that demo that I just did should actually work in exactly the same way in Excel on the Mac, which I think is going to be pretty cool. The other question is, well, this is on the desktop. Can I actually consume my report in the browser? Power Query in Excel Online is also a work in progress, but it's even further behind the Mac. I'm not sure it's really in a usable state. Power Query in Excel Online only at the moment supports getting data from the current workbook, or in terms of external feeds, anonymous OData data sources. And it's very, very unlikely your business data is behind an anonymous OData data source. So I don't think this is going to work in the browser at all yet, but improvements to Power Query and Excel Online are coming. So who knows, maybe in a couple of years, that demo that I just did will work in the browser. Now, that I would say is the kind of basic BI. Give me a table, change some parameters, click a button, we change values. But we're just getting a table. What happens if we want to have more complex layouts? Now, if we've got a table of data, you could certainly do lookups using VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP and build a more complex layout that way. I'm not going to bother showing you that. That's, I think, perhaps self-explanatory. Something I did want to show is linked data types. So linked data types are, again, a fairly new feature in Excel. You can have these things, linked data types, linked up to data in Power BI, but they're also there in Power Query. So what does this allow you to do? Let's start with the end of the demo first, and then we'll work back and see how we got there. If I go back to my pre-prepared Excel demo, here we've got, again, a slightly more complex layout report, but I've got my sales orders. I can change my sales order. And when I change my sales order, you can see that the customer name changes, the occupation changes, the sales amount, unit price, and the tax amount change. So a little bit more attractive than a standard report. How have I got this? Well, if we work back one, the data that we're getting here is all got from this hidden sheet. So this is a Power Query query very much like the ones I've been showing. There's a date parameter here. I can change that and get things here. But now instead of a table with all the data that I want with different columns, I've got one column, and this column contains Excel linked data types. So I've got a linked data type that represents sales order numbers. And if we take what's in B5 here, I could just type B5. That links to the data type in this cell. And what you can see is that when I start accessing cells that contain linked data types, I've got not only the sales order number, but all different attributes of the sales order number, like the year, the color, the day of week it was sold on, the sales amount, the tax amount. And these are available as properties in my formula. So if I was to say, let's just do it like this, and that was slow. B5 dots color and hit enter. You can see I can get the value read out. And that's how I've managed to say, well, I've got a drop-down list here. This is, again, Excel data validation that links to that table there. That brings the Excel data type into this cell. And then all of these other cells here simply reference the Excel data type here in D4. So here, D4.sales amount. So how did I get a table with Excel linked data types in? If I then go to the Power Query editor and look at the query that loads this, in a lot of ways, like I said, it's very similar to the Power Query queries that I've just been showing you. If we go up to, say, this point, yeah, it's a Power Query query that goes to the AdventureWorks database on my local SQL server. But then I've got in this last step here, the step that creates the data type. This is a feature of Excel that's only available in Excel Power Query. It's not available in Power Query and Power BI Desktop. But what I've done is I have used the Create Data Type button up here. This allows me to take a table and compress it all together into a single column containing Excel linked data types, which gets loaded into here. And of course, like I said, now I've got a linked data type, I can get the values out again using formulas. So this is one way of building a more complex and possibly prettier report layout. So far, so good. Now, we've got Excel-based reports on the desktop. We want to be able to send these out on a schedule. We don't want to have to tell people, oh, open up Excel on a Monday morning, change the parameter to the latest date, click the button, and then you'll have the data you want. We know what people in business are like. They say, just send me an email with the latest Excel worksheet on a Monday morning. I want it there at 9 a.m. when I get into work. How do we do that? This is where we have to go outside Excel. This is where we have to cheat a little bit. I'm not going to use Power BI though, because I'm going to use Power Automate. Now, Power Automate is part of the Power Platform. And most of the time when people have seen Power Automate, they will have seen the cloud-based service that allows you to automate different processes. But included in Power Automate, there is a tool called Power Automate Desktop, which allows you to automate things on the desktop, including things in Excel. So what can we do here? I'm not actually going to run this demo because it is a little bit slow. But here is an example of what we can do with Power Automate Desktop to automate the generation of reports. Now, think back to the very, very basic Power Query query that I did in my first demo. We've got a cell here containing a date, and then we've got a Power Query query that reads that date and uses that to filter data from a SQL Server table and populate a table here. Now let's imagine that we've got this as a template. What we want to be able to do with Power Automate Desktop is open up this template Excel workbook, change the date, rerun the query, and save the workbook with a different name. And then potentially maybe run this for multiple dates, for multiple different parameters. Well, that's what this does. So this is a Power Automate Desktop flow. I am not an expert in Power Automate Desktop, but it took me about half an hour to work this out. So it's really not all that complicated. And I'll just walk you through what it does very quickly. First of all, it opens up an Excel workbook that I've got here called Report Dates. And we should be able to open this up fairly quickly. All this does is it's just an Excel workbook with 3 dates on it. So it opens up that Excel workbook. It reads the 3 dates, all of that data in the cells from B2 to B4, and it stores this in a variable. And then it closes that Excel workbook. The next thing it does is it loops over those 3 dates that it's just read. It launches Excel with that template Power Query query in. It injects the current date that we're looping over into cell C2, which is the cell I know my Power Query query is going to read the date from. It runs the Excel macro to refresh the Power Query query. It waits 10 seconds for it to finish. And it then generates a new file name and saves the Excel workbook as that new file name and closes Excel and then loops around to the beginning again. So the end result is that I get 3 Excel workbooks for the 3 dates that I entered in that report dates here. So these are basically just 3 workbooks with 3 dates with that Power Query query refreshed for those dates. So you do need to pay a bit of extra money for this. You do need to learn another tool, but for scenarios where you want to be able to just automate doing things in Excel on the desktop, and you just want to run an Excel macro or change a parameter value in a Power Query query, run it, wait, and then save, Power Automate Desktop can do this. And of course, the other good thing about Power Automate is that it has a whole bunch of other flow in it that means that you can email the workbook that you've saved. You can find out what to do if something goes wrong. Send an email message to me on Monday morning saying, hold on, the boss's report didn't run. You need to get on the phone quickly and apologize. So Power Automate gives you a lot of functionality you can play with here for report bursting. All right, moving on, more cool stuff. I've been using Excel VBA so far, and VBA, well, we know VBA is a bit old hat. What we should be doing is using the new Office scripts for automation. Unfortunately, Office scripts are still a little bit immature, and sadly, they can't yet refresh Power Query queries yet, which is a little bit sad. But I still think there are some use cases for BI scenarios that Office scripts can help with. Let's have a look at one of them. So I'm going to do this demo in the browser. So this is Edge. I've got an Excel workbook here. And let's say that every Monday, somebody sends me an Excel workbook with some sales data that looks like this. And I have to follow exactly the same boring procedure every Monday to turn this into a report. Now, if I go to the Automate tab, while I do this boring, tedious, repetitive procedure, I can record my steps in the browser. So let's click record actions. And then let's say what I need to do is cut this range. Let's put it somewhere a little bit more central. Let's make this a table, and we will rename the headers to be product and sales. And then last of all, let's put in a column chart. There we go. And let's click stop. So I've saved my actions as a script in the same way I could record a VBA script, but I've done it in the browser. And now let's pretend it's next Monday. Let's paste these values here. And now all I need to do when this Excel workbook comes in, I've got the script, click run. And there we are. It's reformatted all my data and built the chart. So yeah, I think that counts as BI. Certainly a lot of BI is this boring, repetitive Excel cutting and pasting type work. And Office scripts can certainly help you a lot with that. Moving on, exploratory analysis. Simple reports with tables are great when you know what you want to see. I want to see a table with sales data for the last week in my inbox. But what happens when you don't know the answer? You don't know the question? Well, this is where you want to just explore the data. And you don't need me to tell you that pivot tables are the king of exploratory data analysis. Pivot tables are the best thing for this, better than anything in Power BI, I would say. Now, this is where Power Pivot comes in, and I would imagine just about everybody coming to a modern Excel user group knows about Power Pivot. And, obviously it's going to allow me to build pivot tables, store data in Excel, but be able to work with way more data than I could fit onto the worksheet. Build multi-column, multi-table models with relationships, use DAX to do more complex calculations, all of the good stuff. And indeed, I've got an Excel workbook here called Power Pivot Report, where I've loaded all of the data from my AdventureWorks data warehouse into Excel. I've built a nice kind of dimensional model, and here is my Excel report. And let's just change the slicer, and you'll be able to see that we can interact with the report, and that's great. I could have done exactly this demo 10 or more years ago, and it still does the job. What's new? What's changed though? What's interesting and different that we could show? Well, what did change last year is the fact that if I've got data in the Excel data model, if I've got an Excel report using data in the data model, using pivot tables, like that one that I just showed you, I can use it and interact with it in the browser in Excel Online. This is new. So here is exactly the same report that I just showed you, but opened in Edge in the browser. And guess what? I can change the filters, slice and dice the data. It'll take a little bit of time to wake up. But there we go. All working in the browser. And of course, now it's in the browser, this gives us the opportunity to share with different people. We don't want to be always telling people where to go on a shared drive to go and find an Excel workbook to open. We want people to be able to view our reports in the browser. This not only works for pivot tables, it also works for Excel cube formulas, for those of you who know about Excel cube formulas as well, where, again, similar to what I was showing you with linked data types, we can get individual values from the Excel data model into cells using formulas. There we go. And we can then use slicers, and the data will update dynamically when the Excel data model refreshes. So personally, I was super excited when we were able to do this in Excel Online. I think this is absolutely crucial for any kind of reporting scenario, because like I said, we want to be able to consume our reports in the browser. Limitations, well, the Excel data model Power Pivot doesn't work in Excel on the Mac, and I don't think it ever will do. So sorry, Mac users, you're going to lose out. But again, if you're a Mac user, you can still use this in the browser. It works there. Somebody else will have to build the report for you, but cool things are happening. And for those of you who are old Power Pivot fans and thinking, well, why hasn't it had any love? Well, it has recently. After I wrote this presentation, but still a month or two ago, we announced an update to the version of the analysis services engine that powers Power Pivot, and we got a whole bunch of new DAX functions available. So it has had some love, and there are some cool things happening in the future here in this area. Can't quite talk about yet, but Power Pivot is not dead. There is a lot of investment and a lot of interesting things going on here in the future. So that's classic exploratory analysis, stuff we already knew about. But like I said, what we want to be able to do is see the new stuff, see the cool new features in Excel that you might not have seen before. So let's open up a new Excel worksheet and see some other new features unconnected with Power Pivot for exploratory data analysis. I work for Microsoft. And of course, I have a very unhealthy interest in the Microsoft stock price. Am I going to be able to retire yet? I want to be able to analyze this in Excel. Now, here we've got a web page with stock quotes for Microsoft on. If you know a bit about Power Query, you'd say, oh yeah, Power Query's got a web connector. We can connect to a web page and grab this data in Power Query. If you know a lot about Power Query, you will know that web pages like this, especially with stock data on, are specially constructed to stop tools like Power Query scraping data from them. Because the people that own this page don't want to be used as a data source. They just want people to view the page and view the adverts. So what can we do? How can we get this data into Power Query? Well, let's open good old Windows snipping tool. Here it is. And let's click New. And let's take a screenshot of some of these stock prices. There we go. And let's copy this to the clipboard. Now, in my new Excel workbook over here, I can go to Data, and there is this relatively new feature called Get Data from Picture. I can get data from a file saved on my local PC, but I can also get it from the clipboard, where, guess what? I've just saved a screenshot of a table. All right, let's try that again. Load it from the clipboards. Hopefully this is going to work now. There we go. All right. So using the magic of AI, it's looked at that picture on the clipboard and it's interpreted it as a table. Now, in some cases, it's not sure what it's found. So you can see the table that's red here, but there are some red cells where it might need to be checked. Let's look on here. That close had an asterisk after it. Doesn't know what to do with that. So let's just delete that asterisk there. And then here for a just close, it's thought this is like double quotes, so we do that. But I think just about everything else it's done a good job on. So we can click Insert Data. And there we are. There is a table of data read from a screenshot. Let's make this into a table. T key on my keyboard is playing up, so I'm just going to do that. So there's my table of data. What other things can I do with this? Well, now on the Home tab, I've got an Analyze Data button. This is great for exploratory analysis. So if we analyze this, pointed at a table, well, look, it's got a whole bunch of suggestions for things, for graphs and charts. Well, guess what? Open and low are highly correlated. Now, who would have guessed that? But all the same, let's insert a chart. And there we are. It's built a chart for me based on that data. I can even ask it questions. So let's say we want date where open is greater than 250. And look, it's interpreted that text as a pivot table filtered, so I only get the dates where open is greater than 250. That's all fun. Usefulness in the real world? Well, maybe not. No modern Excel demo could happen without what I think is perhaps the most exciting thing that's happened in Excel in years. Let's have a dynamic array function. So let's imagine that we want to take this table of data and we want to filter it. Because let's face it, we've got tables of data. We want to be able to do some kind of filtering, I think, on our reports. Let's go to here and let's type that magic number 250. And now if I go and grab a filter function from here, I can now write a formula using the filter function that says, let's get the contents of the table one table, filter it on the open column where the value is greater than whatever I've typed into A17. And there are my dates where open is greater than 250. If I was to change this to 260 or maybe 245, look, I've got a dynamic array. I love dynamic arrays. And if you're a real hardcore person, dynamic arrays, I think, are just game-changing for the kind of things that you can do with tables of data and therefore BI and analysis inside Excel. So loads of cool stuff there. All right, last use case. Let's get into Power BI territory, interactive reports and dashboards. We want to be able to do kind of flashy, interactive, click here, slice and dice demos that we do in Power BI in Excel. And what I just showed you a moment ago with Excel reports connected to the Excel data model in the browser gives you pretty much what you want. Well, we had a fairly basic Excel report earlier. Let's go to, actually, I had it all open all along. There is my Power Pivot report. Wherever the slices have gone, let's reopen that. Come on, there's the slices. All right, so here is our slightly nicer looking Excel report. Now, like I said, sharing in the browser is going to be absolutely crucial. There is one more thing, though, that we have to deal with before we go and share our Excel reports with everybody. What could that be? Well, the fact is, here I've still got an Excel report. I've got an Excel workbook. And with reports, I want multiple people to be able to view this report at the same time. Now, if I just say, here's the Excel file, go and open it in Excel online, what's going to happen? Let's see. I'm going to copy this URL. Let's open it in Chrome and pretend to be another user. So let's drag this down here, open this in Chrome. And let's pretend that I'm two different users using the same report at the same time. Oh, actually, sorry, I've messed up the demo a little bit. Let's open this in. All right, I think this is not going to work. The problem is that if two people open this and one person changes the slicer, then that change of the slicer is going to be visible to everybody. So let's imagine that I'm looking at my report. Suddenly the slicer is going to change magically before my very eyes because this is a single Excel workbook. And guess what? Everybody else is playing around with it. The changes they're making are going to be visible to me. That's not a good thing. Now, we can get around this. What we have to do when we share the Excel workbook with other people is not to share it in the normal way. We've got to make sure that we share it using the can view setting. We don't want people to edit, we want people to just view the Excel workbook. The good thing about the can view option, though, is that it means you can still interact with slices. So if you build a report and you want people to interact with the slices, guess what? You can still do that. You can also actually still interact with the pivot table and move things around, and those changes won't be visible. So if you're sharing, you've got to use the can view option. There is also something else you can do as well. If you want to share this report with somebody, perhaps, and then embed this in SharePoint, you can use the embed option, which gives you the option to share either the entire workbook or just a range. You can hide grid lines, let people sort and filter. This iframe code would allow you to embed in your own website. But if you were to paste that into here and then just grab the URL embedded in this, this automatically has all of those options that we just selected applied. It doesn't look like Excel anymore. It just looks like a report. It's got the grid lines turned off, but it's still interactive. And this, I think, is a lot slicker and a lot more professional and a lot more like the kind of report that I would want to interact with. All right, that brings me to the end of my session. Where are we? What's the conclusion? We don't need to prove that Excel is the greatest data analysis tool that's ever lived, because it is. It's used by billions and billions of people. What we've proved, though, is that for BI and reporting purposes, it's better than ever. It's moved on even from where we were 10 years ago with modern Excel and Power Pivot and Power Query. We can build web-based reporting solutions. Still doesn't work well on the Mac. Automation, automatic refresh, that is going to still be a problem. If you're refreshing data, you're still going to have to do that on Windows desktop, even if you can use Power Automate desktop. But overall, it is pretty good and a lot better than it was even a couple of years ago. Personally, I would still say use Power BI because Power BI has got all that amazing functionality for schedule, refresh, for interactivity, loads of things you can't do with Excel. But if you're not using Power BI, you're certainly going to have Excel, and Excel is still a great choice. So that's me done. If anybody's got any questions, let's have a chat.
I had one question, and anybody else feel free to speak up. Maybe tell me, because I don't know if Chris could hear you. So mine was about the refresh. So I think what I gathered you were saying is that whether it's Power Pivot or a workbook connected to a Power BI data set, you can't refresh it in the browser except for doing something like Power Automate Desktop. For all of those, you'd have to refresh locally. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the big missing feature at the moment. There's refresh has to happen on the desktop, and there's no automation at all for that. There's no automation tool. There's no way like you can in Power BI to say always refresh this at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, unless you use Power Automate.
Well, what I appreciated about your presentation is there's all these features we've heard about, but I think you put them together and how you could create a BI solution in Excel. So I thought that was very cool. We've got a question here in the chat.
So what's the best way to save this information? I think probably, I mean, I'm not aware of whether Power Query makes XLSMs particularly large. I don't think I've got a particular opinion on this, but I'm not sure why Power Query would make an XLSM file particularly large. But then again, like I said, I'm not an Excel expert, so I don't know. And then for Jennifer, how does the new BI features in Excel work for a Mac using a Windows virtual environment? They should work fine. I know a lot of people who use Power BI desktop in Excel on a Mac using parallels. I would imagine that modern Excel, the latest version of Excel 365 would probably work in the same way and should work absolutely fine. Power Pivot and Power Query can be quite memory hungry sometimes, but so long as you account for that, I think it should be good.
Well, we have no other questions here in the room, but we really appreciate your time, Chris, and this was very helpful. I learned several things, so and I'm sure others did as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris. Well, everybody,
enjoy your lunch.
Yeah, thank you. The pizza did arrive, by the way, so
good.
I think everybody got some here. So those of you who didn't join in person, next time we'll have lunch and we won't have the health check anymore. So we hope to see you next month. So we'll join you guys. We'll see you guys in January for our dashboard contest. And everybody have a great December and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.